You're listening to Fish Out of Water, the podcast where feeling out of place becomes the start of something new. Dive in with us. Let's explore stories, insights, and real conversations that help you swim forward with purpose. Well, here we are, episode 9, Fish Out of Water, season 2. We're down to our final couple of episodes. We're well into the nice weather, thank goodness. Ooh, it has been a cold winter for sure. More snow than I definitely expected and anticipated. And I think that as we are kind of bringing this conversation to hopefully a healthy conclusion, we want to talk about how our temperament, how our empowered strengths, and the acknowledgement of our limitations is impacting the communities that we are inhabiting. Now, that can be your workspace, businesses. It can be your friend space, hanging out, just doing whatever. But it could also impact your family. How are we building space where there is clear acknowledgement of the strength, clear acknowledgement of our passion and what we're bringing to the table? And so, Lisa, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you have seen and experienced healthy strengths in maybe let's start with like business or kind of the results oriented spaces.
It's a great way to start. And the reason I hesitate is, as I think about that, some of the better examples that I can think of were actually teams that I led, and not to speak to my leadership so much as it was, I did a lot of experimenting with my teams and had some really cool results actually. So I had a team of 4 people at this one job, and they all had super different personalities and core temperaments. It was really interesting. And different ages as well. One guy was like 55, one guy was like 28, all kind of doing the same stuff at different paces. And so in my experimenting with these folks, it was really cool to see how, so the guy was 55, he was like empowered. He's like, let's get this done, let's go forward. I know what's required, let me do it. And so letting him go was like watching a racehorse. It was really cool. Then the other guy, who was 28, he was more of he was also empowered, but he showed up a little bit more like the intentional. He wanted to chat with people and just have that camaraderie and so on. So some of his productivity would get a little bit held up. However, in that relationship building and making sure people were, good to go and so on, people would go to him and ask for a bit of help and so on. And it was interesting because he felt, for lack of a better word, empowered. He felt it helped to bring him confidence in that because he had helped to create the safe space. And then I had a woman, and she was a young mom, and she was very much the reflective style. So things always had to be done in a certain order. And there were times where I would ask her to step outside of that order. And it was a real struggle for her. And at one point, I did a little bit of coaching with her and kind of questioned her through, like, what are the things that are holding you back? What is it that makes it so important for you to do things in this order? And so the conversation actually ended up being very insightful into her psyche of how she processed through things. And when I think we only talked about it for 10 minutes or so. And at the end, she's like, okay, I already see where I can let go of some stuff. But in having that short conversation, she flourished from that, because she started to recognize the things that really kept her feeling clamped down and like this is why things had to be so rigid, and she became a lot more fluid. Being in project management and so on, you have to be willing to like turn on the dime, especially when you're managing multiple projects at the same time. So, and then the last person, she was how would I say, she was also supportive. She was someone that was always willing to step up and help to train people and help to make sure that they understood what things needed to be in place for specialized projects and so on. And watching the four of them, as much as they had their own projects working together, I found that, me being the leader as a supportive, really, I did a lot of listening and then a lot of, okay, so what do you think the next step is? Not that I didn't, sometimes I had to say, okay, this is what you need to do, but really trying to work with them to help them start to build the confidence to make the decisions they knew needed to be made. And it was a really cool environment for all five of us, because I think everybody felt they had a voice at the table, and that is something that I really found was unique in that environment. I hadn't experienced it up until that point.
I love the way in which each of the lenses are being activated uniquely. And so I think that when we talk about this autonomic process of really diving down into our own psyche, how are we observing the world around us? And prior to this mastery of who we are and how we contribute to a space, I think there's probably people that are listening that may be looking at their environment, whether it's relationships, business, workspace, or even family spaces, and they're trying to understand what is their reaction. Why are they feeling the way that they're feeling in the spaces that are being cultivated around them? Can you talk a little bit about some of the earmarks? And again, these are not perfect. These are not going to be consistent across every space and community that you might be experiencing. But I think there's probably some key elements within who we are and how we respond to how space is formed, that um like a space in and of itself can have an identity. Does that make sense? When it's driven autonomically, so it's not even aware, like people in the
Mhm.
space. Like I know that as a parent,
Mhm.
I wanted to always cultivate my family as a serving family. Well, that's because that's who I am.
Mhm.
But my kids have really resisted serving
Mhm.
because it became an expectation for them. So I would have the chores, but they were not opportunities for them to contribute. They were expectations that mom and dad had of them. And so they
Mhm.
push back and they resisted as teenagers. Um, can you speak a little bit as to maybe what some of the indicators might be if you're in a space that you're uncomfortable with? What are we looking at?
For each of the core temperaments, I'm assuming you want me to address that from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So we'll talk about the same team. So the woman who was reflective and really had to do things in a certain order, that was when I first recognized that, okay, this is a thing for her. For me, that was an indicator that there was a level of control that she needed to maintain for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's bad. Everybody needs a certain level of control. Um, but it was more than was necessary for the work that we were doing. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
going to have a better outcome. Um, and things just changed too quickly. And so when I started to recognize this need for rigidity and control on her side, I had to look at, like, how do I help to create a safer space for her? And again, that conversation that we had in that, 5 or 10 minutes of questioning, I don't know that we had another conversation as extensive as that one, but her just hearing the things that she didn't speak out loud that were going around and around in her head, um, what coaches would call limiting beliefs or blocks, depending on what it is. Um, it really helped to free her up and expand her way of thinking and about the work and about who she had to work with. Um, it was it was a delight. It seems like such a an airy fairy kind of a word, but it was such a delight to watch her blossom from that place of fear. We've talked about that, and how it distorted how she saw everything around her. And then the person who was the intentional one, um, they're wanting to create a safe space. That was when they were like around being the not the busybody, that's the wrong term, but just the bee going around and buzzing in everybody's ear and chatting with them and so on. And I think that was his way of really creating this safe space because that's what he knew, right? And so he had a couple of projects where he was working with customers who were not very relationally driven, were probably more empowered. Let's get the project done. And I think in not having the words or the language to deal with those folks, um, it really put him into this place where he was uh, just not feeling like he had having that safe space. I'm going to just keep calling it a safe space because regardless of what the intentions are, he really needed to feel like he had a voice and that he was being heard and taken seriously on the job. And then the person who is empowered, he was somebody who would just push through whatever or whoever to get the job done. And sometimes it worked really well, and other times I had to shake my head. Oh my goodness. Um, because for him, I think the fear of things falling through and not getting done on time or to specification or budget was a big thing for him. And so one of the things that I had to discuss with him was if these things don't go through, it's not your fault all the time. Project manager,
Mm.
uh, generally speaking, will take things on and, uh, if they're very caring about their work, they will tend to take on all that responsibility of whose fault it is. But there's things that happen, um, equipment doesn't show up on time. The stuff you actually have to install doesn't show up on time, whatever it is
Mm.
for that project. And you have no control over those things.
Mhm.
And helping him to recognize what was his fault and what was not. Over time, I started to see him like relax a little bit. He'd get a piece of bad news, and I'd always know right away because his hands would slam down on the table. And I'm like, breathe through it, brother, breathe through it. And then he would, say such and such is not going to be there on time. And, the customers, and I was like, who was responsible for getting the stuff there on time? And he's like, well, the customer arranged it with the company. I'm just, you know, looking after the install or whatever. And so this is out of your control. You could not have helped this under the circumstances. And then as a supportive person, I know some of the things that I personally have dealt with is really struggling with when people aren't getting along. Um, whether it's not coming to a decision, whether it's personality conflicts. There were times where, as a leader, I would step back because I would get so caught up in um, the feelings and okay, this person is not having anything of what's going on around them, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And truthfully, there wasn't really much for me to do. People had to work it out themselves, but me being a bit of a mother hen and wanting everybody to get along and receive the support where they needed and have a voice, I that was something that I really struggled with at times. And overcoming some of that is, recognizing that it's not for me to look after all of those details. I can support as best I can, but after that, it's up to people to step back and, am I listening to this person? Okay, I don't agree with them. Is there a compromise? Whatever the situation is. So that's my really long answer. I hope that I've answered your original question, but moving from having watched these folks move from their places of fear and insecurity into places of greater confidence, I think that's really what we're trying to accomplish in all of that we've been talking about, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
So I think that there a phrase that you use consistently that I want to make sure we define,
mhm,
because it somewhat is a dangerous if it falls within current cultural dynamics, and that's the term safe space.
yeah.
That I think as we are unpacking, how
Hmm.
are we empowering you as the listener? How are we being empowered as a person within community? Your safe space is not an echo chamber.
It's also not a place of comfort necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I don't I think that, and I love the analogy of strength training. Again, coming back to, it's not a sport, but let's talk about kind of this exercise thing, and the idea that you cannot develop a muscle unless it is put under tension. So your temperament is one of your essential psychological muscles,
Yeah.
and it will never become strong if it's never put under tension, if it's never put under pressure. That your safety is in tension. And that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, because our culture doesn't allow for that, because we're constantly acquiescing or we're leaving.
Hmm.
There's more, I don't like this job, I'm going to quit and go
Hmm.
and try to find the next perfect job that never
Hmm.
actually appears. But now we're hop, skipping, and jumping from one thing to the next,
Hmm.
trying to find that space where I'm seen, where I'm noticed, where I'm heard. But
Absolutely.
we're not seeing, hearing, and listening to other people in that same vein that we're having the expectation. So even if you go back now, if you take this reference of a safe space is a place where you are in under tension, under pressure, but you are not being destroyed, that you have the firm identity of, these are my strengths, but these are my very strong limitations, and I have to be aware of how these are set in balance. If you were to go back and listen to all of our other episodes, I think it might even change the way some of the stuff we've heard in the past actually comes out. Um, and I guess maybe I'm sorry that we had kind of defined this earlier, but I really like how you've defined this, and I think that this very next kind of controversial layer is, how do we allow this pressure? How do we allow this tension to now become permission for us to be formed stronger? How does the muscle, if you are a muscle, but you're not, like you and I are not the same muscle in a community, you're supportive, I'm empowering. So how then do we collaboratively work together to build out the space that is ultimately healthy?
So we're essentially talking about what makes a healthy environment healthy versus toxic, right? And we often hear, it's the leadership of so and so that makes it toxic. And that's not entirely not true. um But the people around that leader and how they respond and react, I'm going to use both words, help to define that environment as well. And so
Mhm.
I think it's important that we think about leadership in terms of, or how leadership affects community alongside the relational response that people have in the environment to that leadership. Um, I can think of several big names that have been accused of being toxic leaders and so on. And I wonder if the people around them as a team said more together as a united front, in a caring, productive way. I mean, some people are narcissistic. There's nothing you can do other than therapy, I guess. But what those environments might have looked like had those conversations been had.
I think the the danger of the N word, the narcissistic context, is something that we throw around in our culture and our society when we ourselves are not having our way or our needs met within a construct.
Hmm.
And yet we are not simultaneously bringing our strength and making room for other strengths in that. And so I think when we talk about collaboration, when we talk about and so for me, so over the last several years, I've worked within this global construct where I'm on several different teams that are based literally throughout the world: Australia, the UK, Brazil, South America, Portugal, United States, and in Canada. Um, and we have one rule, and across all of these teams, it's relationship over results. It is more valuable that we have a stronger relationship at the end of the outcome than it is to have the outcome met. We would much rather restart the project with a stronger relational core than it would be to sacrifice these relationships in order to get something done or completed. And I've literally seen teams completely restart, and I've seen teams completely dissolve because the
Yeah.
construct of the team doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work to what's trying to be accomplished.
Yeah. So
Um,
you get the big project done and you hate each other at the end of it. How are you ever going to recreate what you just did? Not with those same people because you can't stand them, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not duplicatable in other settings
Yeah.
because of the way it was pushed through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and not every instance does this work. I would think that this approach would have to come from within a business structure. This would have to come from top down.
Mm-hmm.
Leader would have to decide that the relationship that I have with my staff, the people that are on project, is more valuable to me than the project. That has to come from that person.
Right.
and and I believe all four of these core temperaments can shift into that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It might be uncomfortable in the beginning, but it is really about having a ear that listens. It's
Mm-hmm.
about it is about how do I become flexible and adaptive? Maybe I change the due date. Maybe I change the framework. Maybe I change and there's all kinds of different things that we can shift in the middle
Mm-hmm.
to get us to the desired outcome in a form that everyone got better through the process. I think that's authentic collaboration.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to bring to the surface of this conversation is if you're in a business, if you're in a family, if you're in a group of friends or relational where it isn't constructive to you, it is about how are we making space for others in the
Yes.
midst of that?
Absolutely.
Are we bringing our strength in a negative way? Am I simply just going to steamroll others versus, hey, I'm really good, I can do this? What about you? Where are you meeting this in it? And we're
Mm-hmm.
talking in idealisms, which is
Absolutely. Because I was just
somewhat
gonna say,
frustrating.
So, I
Mhm.
mean, you can ask questions like, what am I bringing to the table here that's helping? And you have no feedback, so you really don't know, or you lack the confidence to be able to identify what it is that you're bringing just because of the environment that you're in and the people around you. So, yes, very much so. We are talking in idealisms here, to be clear. I think those questions that you bring up are super important because having those questions and being able to answer those questions of what's driving this, what's missing in this environment, what's the thing that's happening that needs to be recreated in the future. These types of questions are going to help you to sit in the moment and really
Mhm.
reflect on what's going on in the room. And it's not about who's right and who's wrong and who's good and who's bad. It's just a simple thing of what can I do in this environment to help to bring health, to bring help to create safety for people to explore things about who they are. How do I help us become, a closer team or more productive or so on? And it may not be up to you. Those Some of those questions are again very idealistic,
Mhm.
um, but they're healthy questions to ask. And I think that the teams that have that kind of um what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of culture of
Mhm.
introspection as much as looking at outwardly and looking at what's going on outside of each individual, they have a better chance of reaching the heights, whatever those
Mhm.
mountains are that they're trying to conquer, whether it's, building a healthy family or just having a close core group of people that you always feel safe around because you create safe spaces for them, or being in a boardroom of very powerful people just because they walk in their confidence or seem to walk in their confidence. And
Mhm.
so this, looking at from permission to rewire, those questions are going to help to take you into that next phase. If you can get other people on board, I mean, it has to start with someone, but as you go forward, it's something that you can start to notice how your group is operating and how you might be able to contribute to the health of the collaboration in whatever
Mhm.
way that
Mhm.
that looks like. um
I love when we look at what it means to rewire. When I remember Simon Sinek, and
I love Simon
um
Sinek, just had to say that out loud.
yeah,
Shout out to
right, like,
Simon
shout
Sinek.
out to Simon. I mean, I don't know if you'll ever listen to our podcast, but I think so much of kind of how I frame a lot of the things that I've been growing in really come right from the essential message that he has.
Yeah.
And I go right back to the very beginning. Now, it's not his beginning per se. I love how he identifies himself as a human evangelist. He wants to evangelize humanity in the context of relational connectivity. And in one of the more viral posts in his earlier messaging was this. He was on a podcast or on a show with Tom Bilyeu on impact theory, and he was asked the generational question. And he took about 15 or 16 minutes and he unpacked the entire process of converting knowledge to wisdom so that the next generation is
Mm.
empowered to move in who they are, both in business, in culture, in society, in relationships, in all things. And I absolutely cherished it. And it was kind of one of my essential introductions to him. And so I think that when we as leaders of companies, relationships, families, if you're a parent, if we begin to see life through the people who are serving the mission, serving the family,
Hmm.
serving in whatnot, if we can listen longer and talk less, And Simon has another clip where he talks about entering into a room with a CEO, and he was young, he was new into consulting, and he sat and he listened to every single person. And then at the very end, when it was his turn, he waited, he paused intentionally to really collect what everyone had said before he brought his idea to the table. It isn't about being the first. It isn't about being the one that is good, the idea that's going to be chosen, but it is about the adaptive flexibility necessary to have everybody on team.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about my global teams that we're a part of, it really comes back to this: collaborative experiences are found in and when we are all operating in our strength. When I can hand off the baton, sports reference, relay racing, when I can hand off my part to the next person in the chain, next person in the process, but yet simultaneously remain available.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if we're on a team we don't like each other, I'm going to hand off my thing and I'm like, "Whoop, it's all on
Yeah.
you now,"
Yeah.
and I'm not going to engage in a healthy way.
Yeah.
I think that becomes equally dangerous. And so I think the biggest indicator for a healthy community is not loud, it's not boisterous. It is really defined by how presence is being developed,
Yes.
and that we're revisiting those essential cautions. Is
Yeah.
this, am I creating a more rigid space? Am I so focused on connection that I'm driving hard in the noisiness of the space? Or am I slowing everything down on purpose because I just want it to be slow? Or am I so set on where we want to get to that nothing's going to turn me aside?
Mm-hmm.
That all of those things are important when they're healthy,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
how they interact with one another, I think, is key. So yeah.
I hope folks have gotten something out of this conversation. I know that there's some things that I'm walking away with as well. And um I think for me the biggest thing that I'm taking away today is, as much as we're talking about idealistic things, it's the idealists who really try to um push past what everybody sees as reality, and it's the things that can make the biggest difference in a lot of
Mhm.
cases. So with that, we are going to end the episode here. We thank you all so much for joining us for this week's podcast, and look forward to our next one, and it'll be the last one for season 2, where we wrap some stuff up and maybe give you a sneak peek of what's to come. But we've so enjoyed being here in this episode. We've been building to this episode for the last 18, 19 episodes. So we are really grateful to have gotten this far. So going forward this week, I hope you have an amazing week, and we look forward to having you with us next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.